The dog wouldn't let them get any closer. Snow drifted across the frozen pasture as Naomi Whitaker stood gripping her late husband's old hunting shotgun. A few yards away, a massive German shepherd stood over a wounded Navy SEAL lying motionless in the snow. The dog's front leg was injured. The man's jacket was stained with blood. Behind Naomi, her daughter pressed close against her side. Her son stood a step ahead of them both, trying to look braver than he felt. The dog growled, not loudly, just enough to warn them. Naomi could have turned around. God knew her family already had enough problems. The farm was drowning in debt. Winter had been cruel, and strangers rarely brought anything except trouble. Then the wounded man moved. Barely. His eyes opened for a moment. "Please?" His voice cracked in the cold air. "Help me." The dog glanced back at him, then returned its attention to Naomi, still guarding, still refusing to move. And standing there in the snow, Naomi realized she was about to make a decision that could change all of their lives. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from tonight. And if stories about loyalty, sacrifice, and second chances still matter to you, don't forget to subscribe. Upper Peninsula, Michigan, was the kind of place where winter did not simply arrive. It settled in. By late January, snow buried fence posts to their shoulders, swallowed narrow roads, and turned small farms into lonely islands of light, surrounded by dark timber and frozen fields. The wind coming off Lake Superior carried a cold that slipped through gloves, walls, and sometimes even prayer. For Naomi Whitaker, every day felt a little heavier than the one before. 3 years had passed since Calvin died in a mill accident, but his absence still lived in the farmhouse. It lingered in the work boots by the back door, the coffee mug she never threw away, and the old hunting shotgun standing in the mudroom corner. The cattle herd was smaller now. The machinery broke down more often than it worked. Bills waited in a kitchen drawer she opened only when she had to. Still, every morning Naomi got up before sunrise. Every night she told herself the farm could survive one more day. That evening, she stood at the sink rinsing 3 bowls beneath a weak stream of warm water. 2 bowls had been scraped clean. Hers still held half a serving of beans she had claimed she was too tired to finish. Isaiah noticed. He always noticed now. At 10, her son had begun carrying himself like a tired little foreman, checking gates, counting feed, listening when adults thought children were not listening. It made Naomi proud in a way that hurt. Zoe sat near the stove, drawing shapes in the fog on the window glass. At 8, she still believed most living things could be softened by a blanket, a biscuit, or a kind voice. Naomi loved that about her. She feared for it too. Then the dog barked, not nearby, not friendly. A hard, broken sound carried across the pasture and cut through the wind. Naomi froze with one hand in the dishwater. Isaiah lifted his head. That's not Miller's hound. Naomi moved toward the kitchen window. Outside, the pasture lay white and uneven beneath the storm. The barns crouched under snow. The far gate was barely visible through the blowing dark. The bark came again. This time, Naomi saw movement. At first, it looked like a deer caught in the drift. Then a darker shape shifted beside it, low and still, a man. He was down in the snow. Beside him stood a large black and tan German shepherd, bi-angled over the fallen man like a shield. One of the dog's front legs trembled, but it stayed planted, head low, ears sharp against the storm. Naomi's first thought was not brave. It was no. No, Lord, not tonight. Her family already had more trouble than they could carry. A stranger on a lonely farm could mean anything. Hunger, violence, police, debt collectors, a story that started with mercy and ended with regret. She let the curtain fall. "Mom," Zoe asked softly, "is somebody out there?" Naomi looked toward the mudroom where Calvin's shotgun leaned in the corner. She did not move for it yet. "Could be nothing," she said. Isaiah stepped beside her and looked through the glass. His face changed just enough to tell her childhood had left him again in one of those small, unfair ways. "That's a person," he said. Naomi closed her eyes. The wind threw snow against the house like gravel. "Mom," Zoe whispered, "what if he's hurt?" Naomi wanted to say hurt people could still be dangerous. She wanted to say a mother had to protect the children already inside her house before helping a stranger outside it. She wanted to say kindness was easier when the pantry was full and the truck started without prayer. Isaiah kept staring into the snow. "If that was Dad out there," he said quietly, "I'd want somebody to help him." The words stayed in the room. Naomi looked at her son. His chin was set the way Calvin's used to be when a storm was coming and work still had to be done. Grief moved through her like cold water. "All right," she said. She took the shotgun. "Stay behind me, both of you." The cold struck them the moment she opened the door. Naomi led the way across the yard, boots sinking into crusted snow. Isaiah kept close on her left. Zoe followed behind, one mitten gripping the back of Naomi's coat. The German shepherd saw them before they were halfway across the pasture. Its head snapped up. A low growl rolled through the wind. Naomi stopped. The dog moved in front of the man's body, not away from danger but toward it. Snow clung to its muzzle, its injured leg shook. Its eyes held no wildness, only duty. Zoe pressed against Naomi's side. Isaiah swallowed hard. Naomi raised one hand slowly, palm open, while keeping the shotgun pointed toward the ground. "Easy," she said. "Easy, boy." The dog did not move. The man behind it stirred weakly, then went still again. Naomi saw the jacket, the dark stain across his side, the close-cropped hair, and the battered stillness of someone who had forced his body farther than it wanted to go. Beneath the snow on his sleeve, she caught part of a military patch. U.S. Navy. Her stomach tightened. A Navy man did not end up bleeding beside a farm fence by accident. She took one slow step forward. The dog growled deeper. Naomi stopped again. For the second time that night, she almost turned back. She could still take her children inside. Lock the door. Call the sheriff if the phone line had not gone dead again. Tell herself she had tried. A mother had to choose the living first. Her living, her children. But the dog stood over that man in the snow with a loyalty so fierce it made every excuse feel smaller. It was hurt and freezing, yet would not leave him. Naomi lowered the shotgun a little more. "I won't hurt him," she said softly. The dog's ears twitched. She swallowed hard and took another careful step forward. "I'm only trying to help." For a few long seconds, nothing happened except the wind moving across the field. The dog held its ground. Then its posture softened ever so slightly. Then the wounded man moved, barely. His eyes opened for a moment, unfocused and glassy, searching past the dog until they found Naomi. "Please," he breathed. The word broke apart in the cold. "Help me." The dog turned its head toward him. The man's lips moved again, almost without sound. "It's okay." That was all, but it was enough. The German shepherd looked back at Naomi, then stepped aside one slow inch, then another. It did not trust her, it did not relax, but it allowed her near. Naomi knelt in the snow beside the man. "Isaiah," she said, forcing her voice steady. "Take his other arm. Zoe, stay close to me and don't touch the dog unless I tell you." The man was heavier than he looked, his body slack with exhaustion. Isaiah planted his boots and pulled with everything he had. Zoe cried quietly but did not run. The German shepherd limped beside them, watching every movement, occasionally nudging the man's shoulder as if reminding him he was not allowed to disappear yet. It took forever to cross the yard. By the time they reached the porch, Naomi's lungs burned and Isaiah's face was wet with snow and tears he would later deny. Together, they dragged the wounded Navy man through the door and onto the worn kitchen floor. The dog came in last. Naomi kicked the door shut against the storm. For one breath, the house held them all. The widow, her children, the wounded stranger, and the dog that had carried loyalty farther than strength should have allowed. Outside, beyond the frosted window, headlights swept once across the far edge of the pasture, then vanished into the snow. The farmhouse felt smaller after midnight. The storm continued outside, rattling windows and piling fresh snow against the porch steps. But inside the house, all attention centered on the wounded stranger lying on a makeshift bed near the wood stove. Marcus Ellison drifted somewhere between sleep and pain. Every few minutes he surfaced long enough to hear voices, a door opening, firewood being stacked, the crackle of burning oak. Then darkness would pull him back under again. Naomi worked quietly. She had no medical degree and no military training. What she had were fragments of knowledge collected years earlier as a volunteer with a community emergency program during high school. Most of it had faded, some of it had not. She cleaned the wound, changed bandages, checked for bleeding, kept fresh water heating on the stove, and prayed she was doing enough. The German shepherd watched every movement. Atlas had positioned himself beside Marcus and refused to leave. When Naomi approached, he watched. When Isaiah crossed the room, he watched. When Zoe came closer than a few feet, he watched. The dog never growled. He never snapped, but his eyes followed everyone, waiting, measuring, protecting. The next morning arrived hidden behind gray clouds. Marcus woke briefly to find Naomi replacing a bandage. Pain burned through his side, the room tilted. For a moment, instinct took over. His hand moved toward where a weapon should have been. There was nothing there, only a blanket, a wood stove, and a woman who looked exhausted. "You should be resting," Naomi said. Marcus let out a weak breath. "I think we're both overdue for that." It was the first thing he had said that sounded almost normal. Naomi almost smiled. Almost. Atlas immediately lifted his head when Marcus spoke. The dog's tail tapped the floor once, then he settled again. For the next 2 days, progress came slowly. Marcus slept. Ate a little, slept again. The fever never completely disappeared, neither did the pain, but he was alive, and every morning he opened his eyes. That counted for something. Trust arrived even slower. Atlas refused food if a stranger stood nearby. He waited until everyone stepped away. Then he ate. At night he slept beside Marcus. If Marcus shifted in pain, Atlas woke. If the wind slammed against the walls, Atlas woke. If someone crossed the room after dark, Atlas woke. The dog carried responsibility the way some people carried grief, without ever putting it down. On the third day, Zoe sat cross-legged near the stove reading from an old library book. Atlas watched her for nearly 20 minutes. She never moved closer, never reached for him, never tried to force friendship. Finally, she slid a piece of dried beef across the floor. Then she returned to her book. Atlas stared at it, stared at her, then quietly took it. Nothing else happened. But Naomi noticed. So did Isaiah. The next morning, Atlas allowed Zoe to replace the clean cloth wrapped around his injured leg. Only for a moment. Only because Marcus was awake and watching. Still, it was progress. Outside, life continued. The farm demanded work regardless of fear, grief, or unexpected guests. One afternoon, Marcus sat near the window wrapped in a blanket while Isaiah repaired a broken section of fence. The boy worked in silence. The gloves he wore had been patched more than once. His coat sleeves sat too high above his wrists. Every time he bent down, cold air slipped through the gaps. Marcus noticed. He noticed the old tractor parked behind the barn, the missing livestock, the worn boots beside the door. The pantry that seemed emptier each day. Nobody complained, nobody explained, nobody asked for help. Yet the story was everywhere. It lived in the details. That evening, Marcus finally asked the question Naomi had been avoiding. "Do you know who might be looking for me?" The room grew quiet. Naomi stopped wiping down the kitchen table. Isaiah looked up. Even Atlas lifted his head. Marcus stared into the fire for several seconds before answering. "A criminal network." The word sounded simple. The reality wasn't. "We were helping build a case." Naomi waited. Marcus continued. "They move drugs, money, people, anything that makes them rich." The fire popped softly. "They found out we were getting close." Naomi folded her arms. "And they're still looking?" Marcus nodded. "They don't know if I survived." A pause. "But if they think I did." He didn't finish. He didn't need to. The unfinished sentence stayed in the room anyway. That night, Naomi couldn't sleep. The wind had finally weakened. The house sat unusually still. She stood in the doorway of the small bedroom where Isaiah and Zoe slept beneath piles of blankets. The room was cold, too cold. The old furnace couldn't keep up anymore. Isaiah slept facing the door, as if guarding it. Zoe slept curled against a worn stuffed rabbit. Naomi watched them for a long time. Then she looked toward the living room where Marcus lay sleeping near the stove. For the first time since bringing him inside, doubt arrived. Real doubt. Not fear, not inconvenience. Doubt. Had she made a mistake? A stranger had appeared on her farm. Now dangerous people might be nearby. If something happened to her children. The thought stopped there. She couldn't let it go any farther. Naomi lowered herself into a kitchen chair. A stack of unpaid bills sat nearby. The numbers looked larger at night. Across the room, Atlas quietly stood. He stretched once, walked over, and lowered himself beside her chair. Not touching her, not asking for attention, just there. Naomi looked down. The dog rested his head on his paws and stared into the darkness. For reasons she couldn't explain, the gesture eased something inside her. Not much, just enough. The following afternoon, Marcus woke from a nightmare. He sat upright too quickly, breathing hard. Atlas was beside him instantly. The dog pressed against his leg until the shaking slowed. Isaiah happened to witness the entire thing. Neither Marcus nor Atlas realized it. Later, while helping repair a gate, Isaiah finally asked, "Was he your partner?" Marcus looked up. "Who?" "The guy you were dreaming about." Silence settled between them. Marcus stared toward the distant tree line. For several moments, only the sound of wind moved through the pasture. Finally, he nodded. "Yeah." Isaiah didn't ask anything else. He simply handed Marcus a wrench. Sometimes that was enough. That evening, Atlas followed Isaiah back from the fence line. For the first time, he walked beside the boy instead of behind him. After dinner, he slept near Zoe's chair. And long after everyone else went to bed, Naomi found him lying quietly beside the kitchen table while she sorted bills beneath a dim lamp. The farmhouse still struggled to hold itself together. The debts remained. The winter remained. The danger remained. But somehow, little by little, the strangers under its roof were becoming less like strangers. The fever arrived quietly. It began with a slight tremor in Marcus's hands while he tried to lift a cup of coffee, then settled deeper into his body as the day went on, spreading beneath his skin like a slow-burning fire. By sunset, his face had lost what little color it had regained, and every movement seemed to cost him more effort than it should. Naomi knew before she checked the bandages. The wound had turned angry. The next morning, gray light filtered through the kitchen window and revealed what the night had hidden. Marcus lay near the wood stove, drenched in sweat despite the cold lingering inside the farmhouse. His breathing had become shallow, and his eyes struggled to stay open for more than a few minutes at a time. Outside, the wind had finally eased. Inside, everything felt heavier. Naomi sat at the kitchen table with a notebook, a half-empty jar of coins, and a list of supplies. She had already crossed out 3 items she couldn't afford. The antibiotics remained at the top of the page. Marcus watched her from across the room. "You shouldn't go." Naomi didn't look up immediately. She continued counting the coins, stacking them into small piles beneath the yellow glow of the lamp. "We don't have a choice. They could still be nearby." His voice sounded weaker than he intended. Naomi finally raised her eyes. "And if I stay?" Marcus had no answer. The silence between them lasted several seconds before Atlas lifted his head from the floor and looked from one face to the other, sensing tension he couldn't understand but could certainly feel. By late morning, Naomi had made her decision. The old pickup protested when she turned the key. The engine coughed twice before finally coming alive, sending a cloud of white exhaust into the cold Michigan air. Isaiah stood beside the truck, while Zoe hugged her mother's coat one last time. Neither child wanted her to leave. Neither child said it aloud. Naomi crouched in front of them. "I won't be long," Isaiah nodded. "Too quickly." The expression on his face reminded her of Calvin on difficult days, and for a moment that resemblance hurt more than she expected. Then she was gone. The truck disappeared down the snow-covered road, leaving only tire tracks and a slowly fading engine sound behind. The farmhouse felt different after that. Larger, quieter, less certain. Marcus drifted in and out of consciousness throughout the afternoon. Sometimes he opened his eyes long enough to see Atlas lying nearby. Other times he woke believing he was still somewhere in the forest, hearing gunfire that wasn't there and seeing shadows that vanished as soon as he blinked. The fever blurred everything. Atlas never left his side. Not once. Near the front window, Isaiah pretended to focus on a school workbook while Zoe colored pictures at the kitchen table. Neither child strayed far from the living room. The entire house seemed to be listening for something. Then it came. The low growl of an engine. Isaiah looked up immediately. This wasn't Naomi. Her truck rattled and squeaked and announced itself long before arriving. Whatever vehicle was coming now sounded newer, heavier, smoother. Atlas was already on his feet. The German Shepherd moved toward the window and stared into the falling snow. A black SUV emerged from the white haze and rolled slowly into the yard. Isaiah felt his stomach tighten. The vehicle stopped near the porch. 3 men stepped out. They weren't dressed like police officers. They weren't dressed like farmers either. Their dark jackets looked expensive. Their boots looked new. Nothing about them belonged to this place. The men approached the house without hurry. That bothered Isaiah more than if they had rushed. Confident people moved slowly. 3 knocks echoed through the farmhouse. Firm, controlled, deliberate. Zoe immediately looked toward her brother. Atlas stood between the children and the door. The dog wasn't barking. That was somehow worse. Isaiah walked forward and opened the door only a few inches. Cold air rushed inside. One of the men offered a friendly smile that never quite reached his eyes. Afternoon. Isaiah nodded. We're looking for somebody. The man removed one glove and rubbed his hands together as if this were an ordinary conversation between neighbors. There was an accident up north a few days ago. Another man glanced toward the barns. We've been asking around. Isaiah could feel his heartbeat in his throat. He remembered every warning Naomi had given him. Answer questions. Say as little as possible. Stay calm. The men continued talking. Had anyone passed through recently? Any strange vehicles? Any unfamiliar visitors? Isaiah answered carefully. Not perfectly, just carefully enough to avoid sounding rehearsed. The conversation might have ended there. Then a loud crash echoed from somewhere beyond the old livestock shed. Everyone turned. The sound carried clearly across the frozen yard. One of the men narrowed his eyes. Another took a step toward the porch railing and looked past the house. For a moment, nobody spoke. Isaiah could hear the wind moving through the fence posts. He could hear Zoe breathing behind him. He could hear his own pulse. What was that? One of the men asked. The question hung in the air. Isaiah forced himself not to look toward the shed. Probably a raccoon. The words came out steadier than he felt. They get into the feed all the time. The man continued staring toward the outbuilding. Several seconds passed, long enough to feel uncomfortable. Then he nodded once and looked back at Isaiah. The conversation resumed. A few more questions, a few more answers. Eventually, the men thanked him and returned to the SUV. The vehicle backed out slowly and disappeared down the road. Only after it vanished completely did Isaiah realize his hands were shaking. Zoe immediately wrapped her arms around him. Atlas remained at the window, watching. Miles away, the black SUV moved through the falling snow. The driver focused on the road while the man in the back checked messages on his phone. Only the passenger kept glancing into the side mirror, watching the distant farmhouse grow smaller with every passing minute. Something lingered in his mind. A feeling, nothing more. Finally he spoke. Something feels off. The driver glanced at him. You got anything? The passenger shook his head. No. He looked out the window again. But something's not right. The conversation ended there. Yet the feeling stayed with him. Back at the farmhouse, darkness arrived early. The children waited. Atlas waited. Even the house seemed to wait. When Naomi's truck finally turned into the driveway after sunset, Isaiah and Zoe were already running toward the porch before the engine stopped. Snow flew beneath their boots as they crossed the yard and threw themselves into their mother's arms. At first, Naomi thought someone had died. Then the story came pouring out. The SUV, the strangers, the questions, the knocking, the fear, every detail arrived at once. Naomi listened without interrupting. One grocery bag slipped from her hand and landed in the snow. By the time the children finished, she could barely speak. She pulled them closer. For several long seconds, she simply stood there, holding them beneath the fading evening light. The relief hit harder than fear ever had. Not because danger had come, because it had left, and because the two people she loved most in the world were still standing there, safe inside her arms. For the first time since Calvin died, Naomi Whitaker cried without trying to hide it. For 2 days after the men in the black SUV visited the farm, nobody talked about leaving. The subject hovered around the house anyway, lingering in quiet moments like smoke from the wood stove. It appeared when Naomi stared too long through the kitchen window. It appeared when Marcus woke in the middle of the night and listened to the wind moving across the pasture. It appeared every time Atlas paused at the front door and scanned the darkness beyond the glass. The danger had not passed. Everyone knew it. Nobody said it. The morning Marcus finally insisted on standing felt colder than the days before. A pale winter sun hung above the tree line, casting weak light across the frozen fields, while a layer of fresh snow covered the tracks left behind by Naomi's truck. Isaiah was repairing a broken gate when he noticed Marcus stepping onto the porch. The former SEAL looked thinner, older. The wound had taken more out of him than he wanted to admit. Atlas remained at his side. Always. You're supposed to be resting, Isaiah said. Marcus managed a tired smile. I'm getting tired of resting. The boy shook his head. Mom's gonna yell at you. Probably. That earned the smallest laugh either of them had managed all week. A few hours later, Marcus finally told Naomi what he intended to do. The location of the government SUV still sat clear in his memory. It had been abandoned deep in the forest during the ambush, hidden beneath snow and fallen branches. If anything useful remained, they needed it now. Naomi hated the idea immediately. You can barely walk across the yard. Marcus looked toward Atlas. Then I won't be walking alone. The dog lifted his head as if he understood every word. By early afternoon, they left. The forest beyond the farm felt different from the open fields. The trees absorbed sound. Snow-covered branches bent beneath their own weight. Every step produced a muted crunch that seemed too loud and too quiet at the same time. Marcus followed memories. Atlas followed scent. Several times the dog stopped, circling through the trees before moving in another direction. The trail was nearly buried beneath fresh snowfall, but something remained. Hours passed. Then Atlas suddenly froze. His ears lifted. His body stiffened. A few seconds later, he moved toward a cluster of pines partially hidden by drifted snow. The SUV was there, or what remained of it. Snow covered most of the vehicle. One side window had shattered during the crash. Broken branches lay across the roof. The entire scene looked abandoned by the world itself. Marcus searched carefully, not because he feared what he might find, because he feared finding nothing. The encrypted USB appeared first, wedged beneath the driver's seat where it had been thrown during the crash. The satellite communication unit took longer. Atlas eventually found it half buried beneath snow several yards away. Marcus stared at both items for a long moment. The entire operation, the ambush, the men hunting him. Everything had led to these two pieces of equipment. By the time they returned to the farm, darkness had already settled over Upper Peninsula. Naomi was waiting on the porch. Relief crossed her face before she could hide it. Inside the house, Marcus spread the damaged equipment across the kitchen table. Nearby, an old toolbox sat open. It had belonged to Calvin Whitaker, and the metal surfaces showed years of use, scratches, and careful repairs. The tools felt familiar in Marcus's hands, not because he had used these particular ones, because every military man eventually learned how to fix things that weren't supposed to be broken. The repair took hours. Isaiah watched from across the room. Zoe eventually fell asleep on the couch. Atlas remained near the door. Just before midnight, a faint light flickered across the communication unit. Marcus immediately sat straighter, a signal. Weak, but real. The room fell silent. Several attempts failed before a voice finally broke through the static. Identify yourself. Relief hit Marcus so hard it almost hurt. He gave his credentials, reported the ambush, reported the missing evidence, reported his location. The conversation lasted less than 3 minutes. When it ended, everyone stared at him. Well, Naomi asked. Marcus rubbed a hand across his face. They're coming. How long? 45 minutes. The words should have felt reassuring. Instead, a different realization settled over him. If federal agents knew where he was, someone else might know too. Marcus looked toward the window, then toward the hallway where Isaiah and Zoe slept. Finally back at Naomi. I need to leave. Naomi frowned. What? If I stay here, I bring the danger with me. Marcus. They're hunting me. His voice remained calm. Too calm. If they find this place before help arrives, they'll come because of me. The room grew quiet. Atlas watched him. Naomi folded her arms. For several seconds, she said nothing. Then she shook her head. No. Marcus looked surprised. I made a decision the night I found you. Her voice stayed steady. I knew absolutely nothing about you. The fire popped softly inside the stove. I still carried you into my house. Marcus looked away. Naomi continued. I'm not throwing you back into the snow now. Before Marcus could respond, the lights went out. The entire farmhouse fell into darkness. Nobody moved. Nobody needed to. Everyone understood. At the same moment, Atlas rose to his feet. A low growl rolled from deep inside his chest. Outside, engines echoed across the frozen fields. More than one. The nightmare had arrived. Marcus moved immediately, not toward a fight, toward the children. Within seconds, Isaiah and Zoe were awake and gathered in the safest part of the house. Naomi lit lanterns while Marcus checked every window. Atlas became their early warning system. The dog moved from room to room, stopping whenever something outside changed. A shadow. A sound. Movement near the fence line. Then came the glow. Orange at first, small, growing. The old hay storage building had been set on fire. Flames climbed into the night sky. Snow reflected orange light across the fields. The farm suddenly looked exposed. surrounded. Whoever was out there wanted them frightened, wanted them visible. Marcus refused to give them that. His only goal was keeping everyone alive until help arrived. Minutes crawled past. 5, 10, 15. Every sound felt important. Every silence felt worse. Then Atlas barked sharply toward the north side of the property. Almost at the same moment, headlights appeared beyond the tree line. Not one vehicle, several. Moving fast, voices echoed outside. Orders, commands, the sound of people no longer hiding. The next few minutes passed in a blur of flashing lights, shouted instructions, and confusion spreading across the snowy fields. Some of the attackers ran. Others didn't get the chance. When it was finally over, the farm felt strangely quiet. Smoke drifted upward from the damaged storage building. Snow continued falling. The world kept moving. Federal agents secured the property while medical personnel checked Marcus's wound once again. Nearby, Naomi sat with Isaiah, and Zoe wrapped beneath blankets while Atlas remained close enough to touch all three. No one had been hurt. Not tonight. And for the first time since arriving at the farm, Marcus allowed himself to believe they might actually survive this. The morning after the siege, the farm looked older. Smoke still drifted from the blackened remains of the hay storage building. Snow covered most of the damage, softening the edges of what had happened, but not hiding it. Burned timber protruded through the white like broken bones, and the smell of wet ash lingered in the air long after the flames were gone. Winter had reclaimed the silence, but it was no longer the same silence. Federal agents spent the next several days moving in and out of the property. Vehicles came and went. Questions were asked. Statements were taken. Maps were unfolded across kitchen tables. Radios crackled. Phone calls stretched late into the night. Eventually, a decision was made. Naomi Whitaker and her children would be placed in protective custody until the investigation was complete. The news arrived with practical explanations and legal language. Yet, none of that mattered much to Zoe. She cried because she couldn't take her favorite snowman. Isaiah worried about the livestock. Naomi worried about everything else. The day they left, snow fell lightly across the pasture. Naomi stood on the porch longer than she should have. The farm had given her heartbreak. The farm had also given her every meaningful memory she possessed. Leaving felt like abandoning both. The temporary house assigned to them sat outside a small town several hours away. It was safe. It was warm. It had reliable heat, working appliances, and windows that didn't rattle during storms. It never felt like home. Not at first. The first few weeks were awkward for everyone. Marcus was still recovering from his injuries. The federal case consumed much of his time, and interviews with investigators frequently pulled him away. Naomi was adjusting to a life where strangers seemed to know more about her daily schedule than she did. The children adapted faster. Children often do. Atlas became the bridge between all of them. Every night Zoe suffered from nightmares. Sometimes she dreamed about the black SUV. Sometimes she dreamed about fire. Sometimes she woke up without knowing why she was afraid. The solution always arrived before anyone called for it. Atlas, the German shepherd, would quietly leave his spot near the hallway and settle beside her bed. He never climbed onto it. Never nudged her awake. He simply stayed there until her breathing slowed again. By morning, the fear always seemed smaller. Meanwhile, Isaiah spent more time outside. The temporary property included a small equipment shed, and one afternoon Marcus found him staring at an old riding mower that hadn't worked in years. "You trying to fix it?" Marcus asked. Isaiah shrugged, trying. Marcus looked over the machine. "That's different." "Different from what?" "The way most people fix things." The boy frowned. Marcus smiled. "Most people start with the wrench." Isaiah crossed his arms. "What do you start with?" Marcus tapped the side of his head. "The problem." That became the beginning. Not a dramatic moment. Not a life-changing speech. Just the beginning. Over the following months, Marcus taught Isaiah how to diagnose mechanical problems before touching a tool. They repaired small engines, replaced worn fence wire, sharpened blades, and maintained equipment that other people would have thrown away. The lessons were rarely about machinery. Neither of them said that aloud. Isaiah began standing a little taller. Marcus began smiling a little more. Healing rarely announces itself. It simply appears one day and realizes it has already been happening for months. Marcus noticed other changes too. The nightmares still came, just not as often. For years he had slept lightly, waking at every unfamiliar sound. Even after leaving the military, his mind had never fully accepted that danger was no longer waiting behind every corner. Yet something about the Whitakers slowly altered that. Maybe it was the ordinary rhythm of family life. Maybe it was hearing Zoe laugh at something completely unimportant. Maybe it was watching Isaiah become excited over a repaired tractor engine. Or maybe it was Naomi. One evening in early spring, Marcus stepped onto the back porch and found her sitting alone with a cup of coffee. The snowbanks had begun shrinking. Water dripped steadily from the roof. Neither spoke for several minutes. The silence felt comfortable. Eventually, Naomi asked a question she had never asked before. Who was he? Marcus looked at her. The man in your nightmares. The question caught him off guard. For a moment, he considered avoiding it. Then he didn't. His name was Darius. The answer came quietly. We served together. Naomi waited. Marcus stared toward the dark tree line beyond the property. He saved my life once. A long pause followed. I couldn't save his. The porch remained silent except for dripping snowmelt. Naomi didn't offer advice. She didn't tell him it wasn't his fault. She simply sat beside him. Sometimes that mattered more. Several weeks later, Marcus learned something similar about her. He found Naomi standing alone in a grocery store parking lot, staring at a pickup truck that looked remarkably similar to Calvin's. She wasn't crying. That somehow made it sadder. Later that night, she admitted something she had never said aloud. I still look for him sometimes. Marcus understood immediately. Grief changes shape. It rarely disappears. Their relationship grew from moments like those. Not through grand declarations. Not through dramatic confessions. Through small things. A hot cup of coffee waiting on the counter after a long day. A fence repaired before the weather turned. A shared conversation on a quiet porch while snow drifted beyond the yard. Trust arrived first. Everything else followed slowly. 6 months after the attack, the news finally came. The criminal network responsible for the ambush had been dismantled. Arrests had spread across multiple states. Assets had been seized. The investigation was complete. The threat was over. For the first time in nearly a year, Naomi allowed herself to imagine the future again. Several weeks later, they returned to Upper Peninsula. The drive home felt longer than expected. When the farmhouse finally appeared beyond the trees, nobody spoke. The property looked smaller, older. The damaged structures remained. The scars remained. The burned remains of the hay storage building still stood where the fire had left them. Wind moved across the empty pasture. Snowmelt had turned portions of the yard into mud. For a moment, nobody got out of the truck. They simply sat there, looking, remembering, understanding exactly how much work waited ahead. The danger was gone. The rebuilding had only begun. For a long time, Marcus told himself he was staying only until the farm was stable again. That was the explanation he gave other people. It was also the explanation he gave himself. The truth was harder to admit. Somewhere between repairing fences, clearing fallen timber, and sharing quiet dinners around Naomi's kitchen table, he had found something he thought he had lost years ago. A place that felt like home. Spring arrived slowly in Upper Peninsula. Snow retreated from the fields one patch at a time. Mud replaced ice. The sound of dripping water echoed from barn roofs, and the earth gradually remembered how to grow again. The farm came back to life the same way. Slowly, one repair at a time, Marcus rebuilt sections of fencing alongside Isaiah, who no longer looked like the frightened boy standing at the door during the visit from the black SUV. His shoulders had broadened. His confidence had grown. Some mornings he could diagnose a mechanical problem before Marcus even opened the toolbox. The lessons had taken root. So had the bond between them. Zoe changed too. The nightmares that once woke her in tears became less frequent until they disappeared altogether. Laughter returned to the farmhouse in ways that surprised everyone, usually following Atlas, who seemed determined to inspect every puddle, chase every squirrel, and supervise every outdoor project, whether his help was needed or not. The old German shepherd moved through the property with the comfort of a dog, who finally knew he belonged there. Naomi reopened her small roadside produce stand during the summer. It wasn't much, a few vegetables, fresh eggs, homemade jam. But neighbors stopped again. Conversations returned. Cars pulled into the gravel lot. Little by little, the farm stopped feeling like a place where tragedy had happened and started feeling like a place where life continued. 1 year after the night Marcus appeared in the snow, autumn returned to Michigan. The maple trees blazed with red and gold. Cool air carried the scent of harvested fields, wood smoke, and drying leaves. The repaired barns stood strong against the horizon, and the scars left by the fire had finally begun to fade beneath fresh paint and new timber. On a bright Saturday afternoon, friends and neighbors gathered beneath a canopy of autumn leaves. The ceremony itself was small. That was exactly how Naomi wanted it. Marcus stood beside her, wearing a nervous expression that made Isaiah grin and Zoe laugh. The vows were simple. The promises were sincere. There were no grand speeches and no dramatic declarations. Just two people who had survived difficult years and chosen not to face the future alone. A short distance away, Atlas rested beneath his favorite maple tree. Every now and then he lifted his head to check on everyone before settling back into the grass. Some habits never changed. The months that followed brought another surprise. A daughter, tiny, healthy, loud enough to make her presence known to the entire county. The sound of a baby's cry filled rooms that had once held only grief, worry, and long silences. It echoed through hallways where fear had once lived and settled naturally among the laughter that already existed there. One autumn afternoon, not long after harvest season, Marcus sat on the front porch holding his daughter in his arms. The sky stretched clear above the fields. Naomi stood beside him with a mug of coffee warming her hands. Across the yard, Isaiah worked on the old tractor that refused to retire gracefully. Nearby, Zoe ran through the grass while Atlas trotted after her with the patient dignity of an aging dog who understood that chasing children was now part of his job description. The farmhouse behind them was still old. The work never truly ended. There would always be repairs to make, bills to pay, and storms waiting somewhere beyond the horizon. But as Marcus looked across the property, he realized something he had not felt in years: peace. Not because life had become perfect, because it no longer had to be faced alone. And for the first time in a very long time, neither did any of them. A lot of people think home is a place, a farmhouse, a street you've lived on for years, a piece of land with your name on it. The older I get, the less certain I am that's true. Sometimes a house can feel empty even when it's full of furniture. Sometimes a person can spend years moving from place to place and still be searching for somewhere they belong. And sometimes that feeling arrives in the most ordinary ways imaginable. A chair that someone always leaves open for you at the table. A dog that waits by the door when you're late. A child asking if you'll be there tomorrow as if the answer matters. Those things rarely make headlines, yet they seem to matter more than most of the things that do. What struck me about this story wasn't the danger or the investigation. It was how a group of people who had all lost something eventually stopped carrying those losses alone. Not because life became easier, but because the burden was shared. Maybe that's one of the quiet gifts God gives us from time to time. Not a perfect life. Not a life without scars. Just the right people walking beside us while we carry them. If this story brought someone to mind, a family member, a friend, a neighbor, or even a loyal pet who helped you through a difficult season, I hope you'll share that memory in the comments. I'd genuinely love to read it. And if you enjoy stories about resilience, loyalty, and ordinary people finding their way back to one another, please consider liking and subscribing. The events in this story are fictional, but the longing to belong somewhere and to someone is something many of us know very well. As I picture that old Michigan farmhouse, I don't think about the fire anymore. I think about a porch light glowing after sunset and the comfort of knowing someone inside is waiting for you to come home.